Hey, what's up? Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm starting off a Summerween reading vlog. I don't know how invested I'll be all week long. I wasn't initially planning to do this, but as I was looking over my shelves this weekend, I did a little bit of a reorganization, and I have so many books I just have not read, and so I was like, you know what? Let's use this as a time to get through some of the mystery thrillers on my shelves, and then a couple other things I've just had my eye on. I will say I am in the midst of the most painful reading slump of my life, so I intentionally picked books that I could easily get the audiobooks from for the library, or that the hold time on it was short enough that I think they'll come available this week. So let's dive into those first, and then we'll talk about the two arcs that maybe I'll start, but I should start. We'll see. So first up is Devil is Fine by John Vercher. This one, the audiobook was not immediately available for me, but it said relatively soon, as in someone has it and when they're done it'll come to me next. So I'm excited about this. This is following a young man who's reeling after, not a young man actually, we're following the father. His teenage son has had a sudden death, and he says our narrator receives a letter from an attorney. He has just inherited a plot of land from his estranged grandfather. He travels to the beach town several hours south of his home with the intention of immediately selling the land, but upon inspection, what lies beneath the dirt is much more than he can process in the throes of grief. As a biracial black man struggling with the many facets of his identity, he's now the owner of a former plantation passed down by the men on his white mother's side of the family. I don't know if this one's going to be speculative, if it's going to be horror, or if it's just going to be a straight up mystery with just the chilling undertones of being on a plantation. But I have heard nothing but incredible things about this. And I will probably start to physically read this one, but if the audiobook becomes available and I like the narrator, I will probably listen, because me and my ability to focus right now, it's not going great. The other three that I have here, actually four, I was able to get the audiobooks for all of these immediately. I have Lisa Gardner's Still See You Everywhere. This is about a missing persons expert and nomadic loner, Frankie Elkin, who travels the country searching for lost ones the rest of the world has forgotten. Her specialty, cold cases that generally end sadly, but this one could be different. Kaylee Pearson, the beautiful butcher, confessed from the start to enticing 18 men home before slitting their throats. As the clock winds down to her death, Pearson has finally received a lead on her baby sister, abducted years ago. Kaylee's dying wish is to know Leilani is safe and sound. Frankie is eager to rescue a teenage girl, even if it involves flying to a remote atoll in the Pacific, where a charming tycoon is constructing an eco-resort, possibly holding Leilani against her will. But what price paradise? Because now Frankie is trapped on an island with dozens of strangers and numerous deadly deceptions. As the danger mounts, Frankie faces her toughest challenge with no chance of rescue, no hope of escape, and a massive storm rolling in. I am cautiously optimistic about this one. This one has the makings of things that I like, specifically that she's being hired by a very clearly unlikable character, but sometimes that can lead to a decent story. What I am worried about is that we're going to get a Jeffrey Epstein-like story, inspired story based on the island thing mentioned and the fact that it's a teenage girl who's missing. And I am personally tired of reading thrillers who are basing their stuff off of Epstein. I understand why they do it and that it's an easy point of reference for people, but I don't care for it. So I'm going to give that one a shot. I also have Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. I've had this one on my shelf for a little while, and I actually read her book that came out this year, which title I can't think of. I looked down there, but I don't have it on the shelf, but I'll put a photo of it here. And I had high hopes for that one, but it kind of fell flat for me, so I decided I'm going to give her another shot to see if she's an author for me or if we are just not compatible. But this one's about a woman who essentially Groundhog Day her life after her son is out past his curfew, and it says, as you watch from the window, he emerges and you realize he isn't alone. He's walking toward a man and he's armed. You can't believe it when you see him do it. Your funny, happy teenage son, he kills a stranger right there on the street outside your house. You don't know who, you don't know why, you only know your son is now in custody, his future shattered. That night you fall asleep in despair, all is lost until you wake and it is yesterday. And then you wake again and it's the day before yesterday. Every morning you wake up a day earlier, another day before the murder, with another chance to stop it. Somewhere in the past lies an answer, the trigger for this crime, and you don't have a choice but to find it. I like the idea of there being a speculative or magical element to a thriller like this. I think in particular, this has the potential to have a lot of good commentary on what it means to be somebody's parent, and that after a certain point, you have no say in their actions. You have no control over them. And I think that's something that people really struggle with, especially when we see things, especially here in America, when we see things like school shooters or, young men who go armed into places and they do a similar thing like a school shooting, but they do it at music festivals or whatever. And then you look to their parents, and some of their parents are absolutely shocked and appalled by their behavior because they're like, this is not who I raised my child to be. But there comes a point where, your child is no longer your child anymore, and they're just a person of the world who happens to be related to you. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how Gillian McAllister, I keep calling her McMaster, I don't know why, how Gillian McAllister decides to handle that. Okay, this one's been on my shelf for a really long time. It is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This one, I think, has a podcast element, which is why I wanted to get the audio. But actually, before I started filming this, I was taking my dog outside and I was listening, and I did not like the male narrator who initially popped up. So I might try to read this physically until we get to the podcast part and then listen. But this is about a famous podcaster who interviews a stranger, promising to divulge the story of a lifetime. Secrets emerge that threaten to expose the truth of the lives they both worked hard to project and protect. I know that this woman calls herself Josie, and she claims to have the same birthday as Alex, who's our host. And I think it happens over a summer, and they're just kind of in each other's orbit, and things get very, very weird. I've heard nothing but good things about this one, so I am excited to try it. But I am a little saddened by the fact that I didn't immediately like the tone of the audiobook, so we'll see how that goes. And this last one that's been on my shelf doesn't really fit the vibe the way the others do, but I'm banking on that and hoping that maybe if these others aren't working for me, my brain will let me do this because I love this author so much. And I want to read her newest release, but I want to read this one first because they're set in the same world. And that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I was lucky enough to go see her here in Dallas on June 10th, which was release day for Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. And she talked about how there would be no Bury Our Bones without Addie LaRue. And part of that is because she kind of put herself a little bit into one of the characters in this one. Plot twist, was not Addie. And she wanted to write more in that world, but she's like, there just wasn't a space and a time yet for her to kind of have the cachet with her publisher to try to put out that toxic lesbian vampire romance. And she's like, this book and all of its success gave me space to do that. But also, these are functioning in the same orbit. So I want to read this first before I read that. You don't have to, but there are some things I've been told, not the actual elements, but I've just been told there are some things that happen in Bury Our Bones and characters that show up potentially that we may recognize from here and other books. I have read the Shades of Magic series, loved it. Have not read Fragile Threads of Power yet, but I love that initial trilogy, so I don't know which of the books they're going to show up from. I have a feeling it's probably this one, but I wanted to read this, and this is following Addie, who I think initially is in 1700s France, and she meets a dangerous stranger and I think ends up making a deal with what I assume is the devil or some sort of demon who takes claim to her soul. And Addie basically is doomed to live forever, and every person she meets forgets her. And then there's one person who does not forget her, and I think she kind of ends up in a very strange, questionable relationship with that person. We'll see. This sounds haunting and dark in some obvious ways, but in less obvious ways than, say, like a mystery thriller. I have had this audio in my Libro account for quite some time, so I know I will have that available to listen to because I bought it, and I also won't have a time limit on it. So last but not least, I have two arcs that I do not have audio for. These come out in July and August, respectively, and I'm excited for both of them for different reasons. Her Many Faces by Nikki Cloak. I'm excited about because it kind of gives me Notes on an Execution vibes based on the synopsis, which is, when 4 influential members are poisoned at London's most exclusive private club, a young waitress is arrested. Her personal life and upbringing are dissected, and theories and perceptions about her spiral out of control. After the murder accusation, 5 men begin to question how well they knew her. To each of them, her father, her former lover, her friend, her lawyer, and a reporter, she is someone entirely different. But which is the true face of Catherine Cole, and is she a killer? The reality lies somewhere between these different perspectives, and the laser of the male gaze has never been more dangerous. The reason I say it kind of reminds me of Notes on Execution is if the vibe, actually, funnily enough, at the top it says for readers of Girl A and Notes on an Execution. So she's on trial for murder. In Notes on an Execution, you're following the story of a man who is on death row, and you know he did the things they said he did. But you're going through it through the eyes of the women in his life who experience vastly different versions of him, and what they think, how he affected them, and kind of looking at the nature versus nurture parts of how he became who he was. There's potential for that here. There's also potential that she didn't do it and she's framed and whatever. It's short, just under 300 pages, so I feel like that's an excellent length for something to physically read. And then with What Hunger, this one says it's the summer before high school and Ronnie Wynn finds herself too young for work but too old for cartoons. Her days are spent in a small backyard dozing off to trashy magazines on a plastic lawn chair. In stark contrast stands her brother Tommy, the pride and joy of their immigrant parents, a popular honor student destined to be the first in the family to attend college. The thought of Tommy leaving for college fills Ronnie with dread as she contemplates the quiet house she'll be left alone in with her parents, May and Ba. Their parents rarely speak of the past in Vietnam except through the lens of food. The family's meals are a tapestry of cultural memory, thick spring rolls with slim and salty nem chua, steaming bowls of pho thai with thin, delicate slices of blood-red beef. In the aftermath of war, May and Ba taught Ronnie and Tommy that meat was a dangerous luxury, a symbol of survival that should never be taken for granted. But when tragedy strikes, Ronnie's world is upended, her sense of self and her understanding of her family are shattered. A few nights later, at her first high school party, a boy crosses the line and Ronnie is overtaken by a force larger than herself. This newfound power comes with an insatiable hunger for raw meat, a craving that is both a saving grace and a potential destroyer. For fans of boy parts and Jennifer's body, What Hunger depicts Ronnie's Vietnamese heritage and her mother's own experiences in a moving exploration of ancestral trauma, inherited memory, and the violent power of teenage girlhood. This sounds like it's going to be one of those books that's shocking and maybe a little obvious, but it also, when I say a little obvious, I mean, I think based on that synopsis, I feel like I know what happens to her at the party. I feel like I have a particular thought in my head when I hear inherited memory, and violent power of teenage girlhood evokes just a certain thing for me. With books like this, when you read a synopsis and you feel like the story is going to be kind of obvious to you, one of the things I really love looking at is the actual execution of the story and elements an author chooses to weave in, specifically in this case, since we're focusing on Vietnamese heritage, that are different than my own American upbringing. So I'm excited to give this one a shot. This one's also short. I want to say it's 275 pages. So I picked two very good books to have to read physically, if I'm going to read physically, because short books are the best way to get through when you are slumping real hard. So that's my TBR for this week of Summerween. Like I said, it's mostly vibes and some effort and some audiobooks. I have a few others that are also in my Libro library when I was looking to see if I had Addie LaRue in there. I saw a few things like The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones, Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang, and a couple of other, the new Augustina Bazterrica's in there too. And so I'm like, ooh, I have other horror thriller options. So we're just going to vibe it out. I think I'm going to try and vlog and see what's going on. So that's my TBR for the week. I hope you'll come along with me.